Hello, welcome to An Alien Perspective. I'm your host, Vulcan the Irregular. This is the show where we always punch up, never punch down, cracking the social consensus and offering eccentric social criticism for strange times. Are you the GOAT? Are you the greatest of all time, the GOAT? I don't care, dude. What kind of loser are you? Just knock it off. Stop talking about who's the GOAT. I'm sick of it. I mean, am I just a hater? Am I just hating on the all-time greats? No, I think actually I appreciate them more than you do. Because what you're doing is you keep comparing them to each other. You keep saying, let's look at Messi and say, is he as good as Ronaldo? Let's look at Picasso and say, I don't know, I don't think he got past Rembrandt. Michelangelo and Bernini, who was better? You don't really appreciate them. You just want to parade them against each other in some sort of vicious competition. Because these comparisons you're making are really the opposite of appreciation. You're the hater. I'm not the hater. You're hating on them. If you really want to appreciate something, you don't constantly compare it to something else or somebody to somebody else. Imagine if you did this in your personal life. People would think you're completely nuts. You're not going to have a relationship very long if you're constantly comparing your significant other to your exes. Imagine if you have kids. You shouldn't pull a King Lear and ask them, who loves me most? Which of you loves me most? Is that going to be the way you're going to engage them? Well, that's the way you're treating these public figures when you're asking who's the greatest of all time. You're reducing them. You're putting limitations on their excellence. You're getting ready to trade them out for each other. Comparison implies interchangeability. One could be substituted for the other. Right? In baseball, there's this idea, WAR, wins above replacement. How many more wins does this player give you than another one you could replace them with? The value is determined by such a substitution. Now, I'm not saying we should never make comparisons, but I'm saying this is a sort of comparison that should be an obscure metric, right? Like, you're really digging into the analytics and you're saying, Schneider isn't as good as Brooks here and here. But as a fan, as someone who's appreciating greatness, what does this tell us about anything? Right? As someone who is consuming and taking in any sort of greatness, I know this term originated with sports, but it's spread everywhere because it's like a deep pathology of comparison. If you're someone who's appreciating any sort of greatness, you're really robbing yourself of that experience. Of looking at somebody and saying, wow, what they're doing is singular. It's beyond comparison. In British English, there's a term, a oneer. Somebody is one of a kind. And, to even invite such comparisons is kind of silly. Now, if you're a younger person, right, if you're just starting out in anything, you might invite these comparisons. You might cultivate them, right? You might say, well, look at that. There's 23-year-old Novak Djokovic. He could be the next Roger Federer. It might be flattering. But by the time you're 35, Novak Djokovic, it's very, very old. All right? It's a kind of singular mentality of comparison. You're sick of hearing about it. And by the time anybody's become this great person, they don't care about these debates anymore. Right? These debates only exist from the outside looking in. They're for losers. You sit there and you say, they didn't win enough Emmys. How many Academy Awards did they win? They're not as good as the competition. I don't even know the names of these actors anymore. I don't care. I couldn't come up with an example because I haven't watched these stupid award shows in over a decade. But, you're sitting from the outside looking in, and you're the peanut gallery, and you're sort of sticking your tongue out and saying, well, you didn't win as many Super Bowls as Tom Brady. Nah. And nobody that's actually doing this stuff thinks about that as the primary way of doing something. Right? It's not your primary motivation. You don't get up in the morning to do this. You get up because you're doing your thing. Right? Constantly being aware of the comparisons is just a loser mentality. And it also reveals a really sort of strange relationship with time. You're almost denying the future. Right? You're saying this is an end. This is the end of all time. Debate over. Greatest of all time. Period. Time's going to keep going on. Time is still passing you by. It's a reaction to your mortality almost. It's like a way of coping with your anxiety over death, that you're going to say, I'm going to be the greatest of all time. There will be nobody after me. Forget about the whole people before you thing and how difficult it is to make those comparisons. Let's just set that aside for now. And just say you obviously have no idea what's going to happen in the future. You don't know if anyone's going to care about what you did in the future. You can put it out there and hope they will. But to assert that anybody is going to be the greatest of all time is almost a sort of weird apocalyptic mentality. Right? Like, debate over, end of story. And it's crushing to young people. Right? Imagine you're like a 5-year-old growing up and you want to play some sort of sport, and you're constantly beaten over the head with, that Tom Brady's the greatest of all time. He's the greatest of all time. And you're like, well, okay, who am I supposed to be then, right? Like, where is the room for me to do something else if I'm constantly being beaten over the head with someone else's greatness? The natural reaction to this sort of thing is to say, I don't care who's the greatest of all time. I don't care who's the greatest, period. I want to be the greatest version of myself. Right? I mean, you're sort of inducted into this culture of comparison in this way. Right? And if you don't live up to it, or even if you don't live up to it in your own head, then you are a failure, right? And the Tao Te Ching, the ancient Chinese text, expresses this idea: the more you esteem great men, the more everyone else feels powerless, right? And I don't even think that this is something that true greatness encourages, right? Because the people who actually do this stuff don't encourage these debates. It's the people who are watching it and who are probably captured by their own inadequacy that encourage this constant comparison. And they basically want to kill off the future before it ever happens. Right? This is the idol. This is the best of all time, and we're going to sort of worship the idol. It's the American Idol. And you're not supposed to do your own thing outside of that idolatry, right? You're not supposed to make whatever pursuit you're pursuing your own. You're supposed to compare yourself to this great thing. And it's almost a sort of reversal of how we would naturally respond to greatness, right? Because it should be inspiring. Not inspiring in the sense of, wow, look at that, I need to do something better. I mean, it could be that. But even just in the sense of, look at that, I want to do something like that, but it's going to be my own thing, right? You're not constantly thinking about the comparison while you're in the act of creating something. And of course, in all of these debates, the GOAT is obviously someone that's alive right now, right? It's kind of like a miserable narrowing of the perspective, right? Like, oh, forget about the past, forget about the future. Like, this person is alive right now. How implausible is that, right? Like, oh, that the GOAT, the greatest of all time, all centuries, all millennia, all the eons of eternity, they all happen to live in the last 50 years. Oh, what a weird coincidence. I mean, that's quite a claim. It's a very, very narcissistic claim. The future's going to be mad at us for this sort of thing, or they probably won't even care because they're not going to be interested in these debates. There was probably a GOAT debate about who the greatest Roman gladiator was, and nobody knows or remembers or cares. So all I've really got to say is just appreciate things for what they are. Appreciate people for what they are. Don't immediately reach for comparison. I mean, you can make comparisons that sort of bring out the strengths and weaknesses of various attempts to do something. But the idea that you're going to just constantly compare the inherent value of things, right? Like, this is the best director of all time, or this is the #1 all-time television show. Did you know that? This was rated the all-time best. The idea that you're going to make that your basic way of appreciating things is really destroying your capacity to appreciate anything whatsoever. Let things be what they are. People love bad movies. Let it be what it is. You don't say, oh, wow, this isn't a perfect movie. Let it be what it is. Let it not be the greatest of all time. Don't be the greatest of all time. Don't talk about it. This has been An Alien Perspective. I am your host, Vulcan the Irregular. The show where we always punch up, never punch down, cracking the social consensus and offering eccentric social criticism for strange times.